My name's Ian McAllister. I'm a tabletop games critic for the Giant Brain and sort of part-time journalist as well. And we're going to do a little bit of panel today on sort of publishing your game. Now, I doubt there's anyone in this room who hasn't been playing a game and thought, I can do better than this. But what does that mean? How do you even go about doing better than this? From conceiving of ideas and evaluating potential through development and eventual publication, the steps to putting your game out into the world can be fraught with pitfalls. To help guide you through this process, I'm joined by some very knowledgeable guests who I'm going to let introduce themselves, starting with Kat on my left.
Hi there, my name's Kat Tobin. I'm the co-owner and managing director of Pelgrane Press, and we publish mostly horror-focused tabletop RPGs.
Hello, I'm Elaine. I am a producer/designer at Rowan, Rook and Decard, and making the Heart, Sit Beneath Spire, etc., Eat the Rye. Before that, I was Cubicle 7. I was a producer there, working on various Warhammer licenses, Doctor Who, and I've made too many books and I'm very tired.
Good morning, my name is Kevin Young. I'm the CEO of Inspiring Games. Our principal idea is to make a world where our characters can interact with real people. People get to build a world together with us. Our key product is a game called Legends Untold, and the conceit on that is to give you all the depth of an RPG, but with the speed of a card game.
Hi folks, I'm Andrew. I'm one of the co-directors of Eerie Games, based here in Edinburgh. We're actually working on our first game that we took to Kickstarter last year. So our game's called The Old King's Crown. So these fine folks are kind of further down the line than I am, so I'm just as excited to learn just a little bit more as well at this process. But hopefully I can share a little bit of knowledge about some of that process of developing and coming up with ideas and then publishing games.
Cool. So let's kind of sort of start at the beginning of the process, the sort of pre-production kind of areas. And like, so how do you sort of like go about evaluating a project when you've sort of either thought of it or like it lands on your desk from maybe a pitch? How do you go about like looking at that thing and going, yes, no, we should take this further? Who wants to go first? That's an easy start question.
I can go first.
Yeah, sure.
So in terms of evaluating a pitch, I'm not very much on the writing and design side. I'm more on the, as a publisher, looking at pitches people have sent. And there are a couple of things that you look at. You look at the existing market, like what's already out there. Like if you come along with a D20 fantasy game, right? People have done that before, right? Yeah, you're going to have to really struggle to identify and make your game stand out in a really crowded market in that way. So you're looking for something that has a really interesting premise and that maybe isn't currently being covered by, or isn't currently in a saturated market. That's one of the things.
Can I just go to yourself, Alan, for a second?
Yeah,
Look at board games for a second. Like, so how did you, like, when you started Old King's Crown, how did that sort of start off?
Yeah, great question. So our project has started, it's been in the pipeline for about 6 years now, about 3 of actual sort of full-time development. It started probably like many other people's sort of first ideas for games around the local kind of games table with scrappy bits of paper and post-it notes. And then it developed into this process where we thought we can really take this into something a bit further. And that's where the kind of scope of the project started to develop. We started to define how ambitious should we be with this game. And that's something that I think has grown, and it's something that I think we've, over the years, started to get much better at is working out. For example, where do we stop with this game? Where do we either stop adding new features? So I think that's something that we've been able to develop quite a lot over the past little while now.
Yeah. For yourself, Elaine?
The big thing for me with any like new project is, can I visualize this thing sitting on a shelf or being sold on itch or whatever? The ideas always come first, and they're very exciting, and you want to chase them and run after them and go, oh my gosh, I want to write 10,000 words, 80,000 words. But for me, I always attempt to put the brakes on as quickly as possible and say, okay, what are the constraints of this project? Is it an A5, 200-page thing? Is it a like US letter, 400-page monstrosity that you can beat a burglar to death with? Is it a one-page RPG that goes up on itch or whatever? If someone can say to me, I have this cool game and this is what the final thing's going to look like, that excites me more, because then I can sort of, figure out, like, does that work? And it often shows that like a designer, developer, or whatnot are thinking about the medium as well, because a lot of, especially young designers, get very excited and write 80,000 word Google Docs and then sling them over arm at publishers and say, make a book. And I say, what is this? I cannot. I think like most pitches, if you chuck them at a publisher, you maybe get about, I think comfortably you can maybe say you're going to get about 2 to 5 minutes of a busy publisher's time to look at your pitch. And I can't read 80,000 words, I'm so sorry. I need a really concise little pitch.
So you're looking sort of more complete pitches, like sort of like where they see it going?
I think, yeah, to me, like an ideal pitch is give me a sentence. I have like a core sentence that I always tell people to figure out, which is you are X doing Y, optional Z. So like the pitch for Eat the Reich is a snappy, you are vampire commandos coffin dropped into occupied Paris with the sole task of drinking all of Adolf Hitler's blood. That's a great pitch. If someone send that to me, it's like, this is the pitch for my game. I'm like, okay, I'm in. What's the product? And then they're like, okay, it's an 80-page spine, softback, a bit smaller than US letter, so it can be shelved, but it can also be slung at people. And then I'm like, okay, great. I love that. That's a really solid pitch. It's got the concept, but also the medium, the deliverable at the end. So it doesn't. I'm not saying you need to have like art and all this sort of shit and projections and everything, but having a really solid idea of what this, because we make books or board games predominantly, and if people haven't thought about the physical medium, then that's when I start to get a bit like, you're maybe too early to be pitching, I think.
Kev, what about yourself? You're a little bit further down the line than Adam is, board game wise.
I would agree with everything that's been said for sure. And again, just as Andrew said, I'm learning stuff from these guys right now. Always learning, right? But certainly from the board game perspective, this is live as of today. You know, we have published games and we've got stuff out there and stuff to sell. But even today, we've got a new prototype that's been running this weekend. And the reason we do that is because my head of design shows me something and I'm like, that's cool, but actually I need random punters to tell me they like it. And that is so important. You need people who are not obligated to say nice things to you. Not that he does say nice things to me. To say, you need random people, or people, and then you've got to judge whether you should take the feedback on board. That's the heart of it. But you do need other gamers that are not obligated to be nice to you to evaluate your proposal. Certainly for board games, maybe for games.
Well, no, I think if you're an aspiring RPG writer, the very first thing to do is to take your RPG to a table of players and see how they interact with it, and see whether you can even make it run. Like, because you can have the best idea in the world, but if you can't convert that into a playable RPG, then you might as well.
It's a nice idea, right?
It's just a nice idea. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess like for some people, like they're going to like do that, get to the nice idea stage, and like you say, kind of like go to play test and that kind of thing. And we've sort of mentioned like standing out a little bit in the marketplace. How do you sort of hone in on a USP or a unique selling point of those products for like board games and RPGs?
Make it Cthulhu.
Everybody loves the
zombies.
Everything's better with tentacles, right?
Yes.
It's like it was the knowledge in the 80s with comic books. If you put a gorilla on the cover and it sells twice as much, that was like it was like 2010 where everything was Cthulhu.
Oh yeah, I mean
everything had a Cthulhu expansion.
I ran Brindlewood Bay recently, which is, if you don't know, it's a sort of weird little investigative game where you're old ladies in a Massachusetts town that is definitely not Arkham Honest Governor, and you're investigating murders. You're like, it's Murder She Wrote, basically. But there's a sort of culty thing underneath it, and actually that kind of ruined the game slightly for us. We kind of just liked the fact that your old biddies wandering around, and everywhere you went there was just a murder.
You like the mundane Midwest.
Yeah. So that was the USP. But for your products,
I feel like
when did you go?
When
did you sort of go like, okay, I've got something? If you're like solo developing, or if you're publishers, how do you go like, this is a thing?
I mean, for us, the key moment was when we went down to UKG in 2016, and we had like a little starter booth. They were dirt cheap, and you get like 2 tiny little tables, and people who you'd never met before, and the scale of it was huge. And they're just like, when are you going to publish or Kickstarter, whatever? When are you going to make this game? That's when you know there's something there, because they're not obligated to be nice to you. They don't have to be. That was how we realised there was something there.
I would absolutely agree with that. I mean, for us, it was UK Games Expo, and conventions just overall have been a huge, great kind of litmus test of like, where are we with this project? Is this manageable? Can we take this to crowdfunding? So that first UK Games Expo for us was huge, and I think it was a big selling point of our game is the artwork that we have on the game. we do all of our artwork in-house, which is why we can do it in the way that we can.
Pavley's a ridiculously talented man.
It's insane. It's very good. But that has meant that, for example, we've had that development time where we can do that, where if we were, for example, having an outside contractor coming in and doing that, we wouldn't have had the funds to be able to manage that at this point. So that's our big selling point with our game right now. And then the refinement that we've built around it over the past few months and things like that have really led to that.
We can probably help these guys, though. I'm pretty sure we're all in the same, just in terms of the artwork. Unless you're really good at art, which you may well be, don't go and spend thousands on art if you're going to go and pitch your game, because they may well change it anyway. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
May, depends, I don't know. Certainly for us, we were more likely to want to use our own art. We've seen people doing that. You may have different views.
Yeah, what about on the RPG side? Because obviously RPGs are growing massively at the moment. They're becoming much more mainstream. How do you know like you've got a hit basically? Or do you not?
You never know.
Yeah, you never know for sure.
Roll dice.
You roll dice. That's exactly it. I mean, you don't know. Like, again, like Elaine was saying, like you can tell a lot from the elevator pitch. From that first kind of, if you can encapsulate your game into a really grabby kind of 30-second pitch, then there's a really good chance there's something solid there, and it's just developing out that idea. When we're getting people to pitch us, we generally do it in almost 3 stages. So we do kind of, the first stage is like, give us the elevator pitch, what's the high-level concept, and then kind of give us like a page explaining, and the question we always ask is, what do the characters do in the game? Right, that is the fundamental, most important thing to us, because we publish very character-focused and kind of narrative-focused games. So we want to know what kind of experiences you want the players to have at the table, and how you are then making that happen through the mechanics of your game or through the setting of your game.
For yourself, Elaine?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's very similar to what you're saying. Is like the initial, if you find yourself unable to boil down your board game or your role-playing game into a succinct pitch, and I'm talking like 1 A4 page at maximum, that you can send to someone, I would argue you need to refine things more. I love everyone. Everyone's very creative. I'm sure everyone has beautiful, wonderful worlds. And dragons are different in your world, and elves are actually aliens or whatever, and that's cool, that's great, but it's still going to all boil down to those immediate cell sheets, the snappy sort of things. I would say in terms of art, you can definitely overspend in the early days, and overcommit. Sometimes it can work out. I've done 3 board games, well, 4 if you count. Okay. No, 3 or 4 board games, and we self-published like a Doomsday Bots Adventure Mart and Familiar Alchemy, and for those we did pay for all of the art up front, and then we were lucky that our publisher at the time, Hub Games, just was like, yes, we like this art, that's good. But I have heard horror stories.
Can I nerd out? So you guys did Familiar Alchemy? Because I was playing that with my girls this week.
It's good.
Amazing good.
Familiar Alchemy.
It's amazing good. Thank you.
That's just a thing I do with my partner.
We're just here to pimp our games, by the way.
That's amazing. Everybody has like 5 jobs in this
industry.
Interjecting slightly from a reviewer's point of view, I've started to do more RPG work this year, and the question I ask is, what do characters do? And the number of times I've had someone come back like, oh, so I've been developing the system for 20 years. I was like, that's not what I asked. And I don't care. It's like, tell me what your game's about. Like, what do characters do around the table? What do players do around the table?
One really big thing that I always say to people, because it happens so often, do not define your game by what it is not. The number of people who will say, oh, it's my game. It's like D&D, but it's different. It's not got this or it's not got that. That kills things so much, because it's just like, oh, it's got less options. Why?
I get that as when I go to stands. Sometimes people are like, "Have you heard of this game?" Oh, it's definitely not like that. And you're running into 2 problems there. Either that person absolutely loves that game and you just dissed their favorite game, or they've never heard of it and don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
It's going to be one of those two things.
I don't know about you guys, because obviously this is about publishing a game, but as a publisher myself, we've got an kind of written rule unwritten rule in our house that we never diss anybody else's game.
Yeah,
Anyway.
That's exactly what I was going to
it's
say.
Especially not publicly.
It's just a stupid thing.
Like in RPGs, the industry is so small, right, that you will never be served by dissing anyone else's game in public. No matter what you think of it, just don't do it.
Yeah.
It's just rude, and the world needs more positivity generally. So.
You guys have Twitter followers, but they won't help you sell your game.
Yeah. Lots of hate clicks, but nothing else.
Lots of hate clicks. People love to hate click.
Yeah. So let's move on a little bit from pre-production. We mentioned sort of playtesting there during that chat. So how do you folks go about meaningfully playtesting games, especially RPGs? Like, because board games have more restricted rule sets, are a little easier to playtest, but RPGs that's a harder thread to needle thread. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I can jump in if
Yeah,
you're because this is something I feel very strongly about. I have played, or I've tried to play games by very, very famous games designers that are unplayable because they were clearly not playtested properly. You have got to do two things when you're playtesting. First of all, when you're playtesting RPGs, I should be specific. First of all, you have to play it yourself with your friends, right? You know, just to get all the low-level bugs out, just to make sure it's kind of more of a polished, professional kind of setup before you pitch it or before you publish it. The second thing you have to do is give it to people you've never met. Hand the document to people you have never met before, either physically or virtually, and get them to run it and get their feedback. From what you physically have in your manuscript, somebody else needs to be able to take that and run a game that looks at the table similar to what you would be creating if you ran it at your table, right? That's what you're ultimately trying to get to with your manuscript. You're trying to convert what's in your head to a playable game for complete strangers, right? So external playtesting is vital. Sorry.
From RD's perspective,
Yeah, so I think I have a weird perspective on playtesting because my career began in video games, specifically in quality assurance. And very similar, the thing that I like to say to people all the time is that your rule book or your rules is essentially code for your game that you run in someone else's mind. And the designer, once the game is out in the wild, the designer's not you're not going to sit over someone's shoulder and go, no, you're doing that wrong. No, actually, sorry, the components, especially with board games, no, that's no, that doesn't work that way. So yeah, making sure that the stuff that you write, you can play in a vacuum. You give it to people. You sit back. You do not hover helicopter parent. Just sit back and okay, cool. They fucked that up. Okay, great. We'll work on that.
And they will, right?
And they will.
They will.
Yeah,
I have a theory that about 50% of the board games that are played wrong.
Yeah.
And as long as people have fun. So I think there's there's that. Extremes testing. Extremes test your fucking games, people. Anyone who's had a TPK during the Lost Mines of Phandelver Goblin Ambush will tell you that I'm getting a lot of ink. The Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition starter set adventure, the first encounter. Congratulations, welcome to D&D. The goblins, if you fail your perception check, the goblins can one-shot kill your characters. Because they did an extremes test. They didn't go, okay, a wizard has 6 HP, and a goblin can do d6 plus 3 damage. And if they get to go in initiative order, they can shoot you, kill you before you get to play the game. And there's no advice for that. So, extremes testing and everything. Sure. That's lots of mechanical stuff. And then the other side is the vibes if you're doing role-playing games. Are people interacting with the themes? Are they picking up themes that you maybe weren't expecting? You can sometimes have weird moments where you think you were creating a game that tells people that cops are bad, whereas sometimes people will play the game and go, man, cops are awesome. And you're like, that's not quite what we were aiming for, guys. So, yeah, there can be some sort of getting vibes on themes as well, but I've rattled enough. I'm sorry, hello.
I echo all of that. A couple of things I would add would be what I call like the microwave test, which sounds weird, but when you get your wrapping and it says insert into oven, remove all wrapping, and some people like they don't, it's like actually all of the wrapping, or people are going to do that. They're literally, if you do not write down the exact step, take this card and put it on the board, they're going to get it wrong, right?
Yeah.
So we'll totally agree with that they're going to screw it up. And then the other thing I was just going to say was the fun part of it. It's if people are having fun, it kind of doesn't matter. That's what we're doing. We're basically making toys. I know it really are.
Yeah.
That's our attitude anyway.
Yeah.
You know, it's a game, but it's a toy.
No, it's a curated experience. They're playing it wrong.
I'm much better. You can do my sell sheets. That's much better.
You're having wrong fun.
Forward
For a little bit. Okay.
Just out to like the edge of the table.
Yeah. Excellent. I mean, I would agree with absolutely every single one of those points. Maybe don't trust your friends.
Yeah.
They're going to tell you it's good when it
Yeah.
probably
You've got
isn't.
nicer friends than me.
Whenever I was doing playtesting back in the day, I had friends who would just break things.
Yeah,
Right,
It was great.
Yeah.
It was more demoralising, but it
They
was
will
great.
break it, right?
Yeah.
Deliberately, yeah.
They were great as the first test to say, is this game actually fun? Is there anything actually to pursue here before we start using other people's time and all the goodwill around that? But absolutely, you do not want them to be the only form of playtesting. You've got to get blind playtesters. You've got to get people from the community, people who engage with these types of games. And our game it's quite a heavy game, and it became quite heavy over its development period. And so, getting those people to play those games regularly, to actually sit down and engage with it, was so important for us. And it took time. It took a lot of time to get that ready.
Cool. Let's stay with you a second, and
Sure.
we'll sort of go on to our sort of next question, which is like basically how do you decide, once you're sort of into playtesting, how do you decide that it actually something that you're going to like sell to people as opposed to just a giant vanity project?
Yeah, sure. I think it comes from those people that and you maybe don't know, that are going to come to things like UK Games Expo, or come to Tabletop Scotland, and they're going to ask for a demo, and they're going to sit down and play the game, and they're going to come away hopefully with a really enjoyable experience. So I really liked how succinct that was. I enjoyed all the things I was doing on my turn. I loved the theme. I loved how all of that was kind of coming together into this one package. And for us, that was one of the big points when we realised, you know what, this is what the game is. We've landed on the theme. We've landed on what the art style was going to be. We had landed on what you were going to do on your turn, and how all of that would merge together into this one experience without obviously taking hours and hours to play the entire game. That was the moment I think we realised this is kind of the scope of the project, and now it's a case of refinement. It's now a case of make sure that everyone's having fun kind of all points through the game.
From RPGs, from RPGs, Elaine, like how do you sort of like identify the sort of diamonds in the rough? When do you sort of like decide a project isn't actually going to be a thing?
That's a tough one. So it depends. I've worked on a lot of licensed games which are very different, because that's from upon high. They say that we need another description of a bolter, so here comes the Warhammer Wrath and Glory's equipment book and everything, and those sort of like established markets as a whole thing. If you're getting started, I do rate still crowdfunding campaigns. I think crowdfunding campaigns can be a very good sanity check. If you're a new designer, if you're a new team coming together, just essentially chuck it out in the void. Is there an audience for this? Are people excited? Are they interested? The problem can be some of the expectations of crowdfunding have kind of ballooned a lot lately. It's rare to see people who've only got like some text documents and a couple of concept pieces doing really well, because people are like, where's the 5-minute cinematic trailer and the actual play games and the fully edited, arted PDF the instant the campaign funds. But if you're a small team, you're going in with moderate sort of expectations that this is a sanity check to see if there's an audience for it, and maybe invest a little bit in just a couple of bits of key art that you can use really nicely and evocatively. I think that can work really nicely as a sort of like, and then you get somebody to make the fucking thing, which is nice. Are we allowed to swear? Okay, great. Sorry.
You tell me.
It's too fucking late
Let's
now.
find out.
It's only been
Let's fuck
recorded
around
for the
and
kids,
find
right?
Let's bounce back to board games a second with you, Kev. How did you decide that?
This
like,
is awesome, because I agree with
how did you
Paul.
decide Untold Legends wasn't just
Legends Untold. Untold
no,
Legends, yeah.
never to be told? Yeah.
Well, it's because it's a video game, that's why we always have to. So I totally agree. We did crowdfund, and I'm not trying to. You warned me not to tangentialise it and crowdfunding too much.
We'll cover. We're going to come to self-publishing a little bit, but we're not going to like cover how to do crowdfunding campaigns,
exactly,
because that's a whole.
But it's
monster.
a dead easy litmus test. You put it up and people give you bucks. But that I totally agree. That market has changed massively since we did it in 2016. We did it with here's some art, and we need your money to make the game. And nowadays it's like, where's your 300 miniatures? Simon all over it, sort of thing. What was the question? Sorry.
Just sort of like explain, like how did you decide that the game wasn't just like a vanity thing in your head and
Yeah,
actually something you want to like sell to people or
It
could
was,
sell to people.
so maybe I'm old school, but I'm a big believer in collecting feedback forms. So we're still even doing it today. And if you've got a stack of 40 people who are literally saying this is fun, and we'll ask them, say, how much would you pay for this, and then give them a range, so don't deliberately kind of put the one you want them to say in the middle. That kind
like
of
a
thing.
magician, like
And
misdirecting.
you've got, I think we came back with like 60, 70 people saying, I would buy your game, I would pay this amount of money. We're just like, you know what, this has got legs. As to what you do with that money, that's a different conversation as to what your expectations are and why you're making this game.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's where we realised it was.
For yourself, Kat,
Yeah.
like how do you sort of pick out the things you want to do?
I mean, so I suppose it's slightly different for us in that it's more all of our projects are vanity projects because we tend to work with a lot of the same writers, so they tend to pitch us ideas and we kind of work with those on it. But again, I think like what Kevin was saying, like it's just a matter of getting it in front of people, like asking other people. That is your step one, you know. So whether that's here in person at Tabletop Scotland, or at another convention, or online, like use social media. Like, you know, I always kind of rant on about like build your presence on social media, but like form a community. You know, like look at other people's stuff, and we'll probably talk more about this later. But you know, getting feedback from other people who are not in your head. You know your game, you know all about it. Other people don't. It's when you start to articulate it, when you start to explain it to other people, you can see from their reaction whether you've got something good or not. You know, if you show your game to people or talk about your game and people are like, oh, then, you know, maybe rejig it a little bit. But if people are like, oh, and do you do this and this and this, then, you know, you've definitely got a nugget of something good there.
I mean, you get that sort of excitement from
Yeah.
So yeah, we have sort of mentioned the ugly word that is crowdfunding there. So like, we'll move on a little bit. We'll talk a little bit about self-publishing, and we're going to talk about sort of more established publishing a little bit later as well. So if you are down that route of like crowdfunding, that's the route you're planning to go to. When you make that jump from I want to produce this and I've decided to crowdfund to actually making that campaign go live, how do you like make that? When do you make that jump?
So I mean, I can give a little bit of insight into that. So again, coming back to conventions, they were huge for us because they were our test to say, well, are we ready to actually go to crowdfunding with this project? Would someone buy it in the current state it is? And then after that, it's marketing. I mean, you're spending all of your time marketing up to that point, and everything you do around it is marketing. Whether it's going to conventions and showing it, whether it's social media, whether it's we had, for example, we were giving out art prints and things like that. Like we were doing anything we could to possibly market the game. But it was grow that community as much as we possibly could, and we found that really word of mouth was really working for us. That kind of organic growth. Our Discord community, for example, has grown massively before the campaign. But we were, of course, using things like the Kickstarter pre-launch page. Those numbers were basically the only data we sort of had to go on. We had our email sign-ups and things. We had some numeric data, but it's often really tricky to tell, is that actually going to convert to anything? And this being our first campaign, we didn't have any comparison point of our own data.
Yeah.
So we kind of took a little bit of a stab in the dark. Of when we launched, we felt we had a big project ready to go. We had all the marketing materials and things ready to go, and we just sort of ramped up to that, picked a date, said, we're gonna aim for this, and if we can get past a certain threshold of pre-sign-ups, we hit the green button and we launched the campaign. And unfortunately for us, it did work. But it's always just that risk, right, of crowdfunding. It's a big part of it. It's very easy to put lots and lots of work into something and it maybe not sort of resolve in the way you want it to.
How does it work at Pelgrane CAC? So you do like sort of more traditional publishing, and you've done some crowdfunding campaigns as well. I think you've just wrapped up 13th Age second edition as well.
Yep.
So
And we're about to start Trail of Cthulhu second edition.
Yeah. So when do you decide like a project is like traditional, when is it crowdfunding?
That's a really, really interesting question for us because I've just kind of changed how we're approaching that. Historically, we've sold a lot of books through retail, so like in game stores, but that isn't as big a source of revenue anymore. So TLDR, we're having to move more towards crowdfunding now because I always had a thing where I didn't want to start a new crowdfunding project until we had completed and delivered the previous one. So I was like every kind of 2 years we might kind of do one. So I was trying to pace it in that way, but like. For us, we can publish a hardback book, and that's fine. But like, if you want to have a color hardback book, or if you want to have like, you know, extra cool stuff, or like with the Yellow King role-playing game, which we did, it was like a 4-book set in slipcases with magnets, and it was cool. But if we have anything like that with kind of bells and whistles or anything that's a little bit different, we'll always kind of test it out with crowdfunding. But the thing about crowdfunding is that, you know, a lot of people think, oh, I'll just, you know, I'll make my game and I'll put it up on Kickstarter, and that's not how it works. You have to bring your own audience to any crowdfunding platform. So before you go to crowdfunding, you have to have people who know about your game and are following it, or it's just not going to work out. So.
Elaine, because RD does quite a bit of crowdfunding work.
Yeah, we did a bunch of crowdfunding. All the board games I've done as well, they were all crowdfunded. I think if you are looking at doing your first ever crowdfunding project, the big thing for me is make sure you've done a thorough budget, get yourself going, see if you can get any investment. The first crowdfunding I ever did, we were able to go to Scottish Enterprise, who have money tucked aside for like new projects and everything. We got like $7,000 from Scottish Enterprise for
Wow.
Doomsday Bots.
Brilliant.
And that paid for a bunch of art, so we were able to put together a really nice, tight little crowdfunding campaign, put that online, and because we had a bit of that investment, that paid dividends because we had nice art and all that sort of shit going.
Yeah, when I was on Kickstarter like recently looking at a couple projects like that, and there was a little banner came up. I think it must because I was geolocated to Scotland.
Aye.
They were saying like there is funding available
Yeah.
from Scottish Arts Council or something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Great Scotland.
that stuff exists.
Great Scotland, sorry. So do check your local area. Check for if there's any grants, if there's anything. Sometimes it's no interest loans that you pay back later. Sometimes it's just here, have some money, go do a crime. Don't do a crime. So that's like if you're new and you're looking to get on there, I think that's really good. Anywhere you can sort of like scrounge up some cash to, you know, make your campaign nice, whether it goes into marketing or whatever, that's really good. Once you're established, I think it does get to a point where, and I believe probably going to be similar, where crowdfunding in a weird way has become marketing for some of the larger folk.
Yeah.
If it's a new game, because we do make the decisions of like, does this go to crowdfunding or do we just publish it and put it to retailers? And a lot of the time it's, is this a new IP? Do we want to get people on it? And the lingering single most powerful marketing tool that people don't talk about is an email thread, a mailing list. Because you don't have control over algorithms, whether it's Reddit, TikTok, Twitter, Blue Sky, whatever. You have zero control over the algorithm, but a mailing list you always have control over. So get people to sign up to your mailing lists. And Kickstarters, backer kits are just stealth mailing lists. Because once people have backed one of your projects, the next time you do a project, you can email everyone who backed your stuff before, which means you get immediate injection at the beginning of your next project, which means you're more likely to get to the front page of Kickstarter, etc. So there can be a bit of a snowball.
For yourself, Kev, how do you make that jump? And also, Elaine mentioned budgets there. So how did you sort of set budget for your games? Put a finger in the air, I guess.
So I do hands on the table. My wife's a chartered accountant, so she would 100% agree with you, and then rolls her eyes when she sees me going creative. Right? You said it was going to be this. It's actually this, but it's cool. It's hard. You should budget, and it's hard to do it. But then you get the weird stretch goals coming in, and you go, well, you know, we could just add in this. What I will say, and I'm a nightmare.
I feel another talks in that one.
Exactly, that's a different thing. What the two things I would add to everything that's said there would be, and we learned the hard way. When we launched 2016, we had the art that we could afford and learned the hard way. I totally agree. If you've got a cool box render for board game, I don't know if it's the same for people think it's a game. There could be nothing made for it, but if you've got a 3D box render, people think it's a game, they will back it. And secondly, we were fortunate to snag some pretty kick-ass reviewers. Rook, brain's just gone because I'm on a panel, but does massive following. He just basically liked the concept and then saw us at UKG and said, you should check out this game, and then before you know it, there was like 3,000 backers. You know, that was fortunate, but influencers can make a huge difference to your day. But they're not all reliable either. Obviously, someone will take a copy and sit in it for a year and do nothing with it. or worse. Sounds of it.
No, it's just I remember you reviewed the prototype copy of Doomsday Bots. You got halfway through a playtest and you were like, it's a bit shite, isn't it? I don't hold it against you. This is why you do need people who will tell you your game's shite.
Yeah.
We made it better.
That was Adventure Mark.
Was that Adventure Mark?
Yeah,
I remember.
We got a couple of turns in and we're like, we think this might be broken.
And it was, and we fixed it, and that's
Yeah.
why you do need folk who will
Yeah, and I
tell
didn't.
you.
As an influence.
Oh.
I don't think of myself as an influencer. I think of myself as a critic.
That's
So,
creative.
yeah, creative, whatever you want to call me. But you'll call me worse. Yeah, so like I didn't do that publicly. I didn't like go on social media and go, oh my god, the next game from this company is the worst. Back at I contacted Elaine and went like, I think there's a problem here. We literally couldn't get through a full game without going. There's a blockage basically.
Absolutely.
Literally unplayable at that point, or like something weird, and we don't understand something, or the rules aren't. Something's wrong.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you're going to be like a critic, there are times when you are going to like. Yeah, you're going to be bad. You're going to be mean about things. Go and see my Star Trek Adventures review, first edition. But that's okay, because that's kind of your job. It's your perspective, and people will say to you like, "Well, it's just your perspective." It's like, yes, that's literally the job description. Is I give you my opinion. You can trust it or not as you wish.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, you can contact people privately if something's just fundamentally not working, and say, "I think you might actually have a problem here." Be nice to small creators.
Yeah. And again, I mean, if a reviewer says, "Oh, I just hate this. This is shite," then that's not very helpful.
Yeah.
But if your reviewer says, "Oh, we got to this point and then we just didn't know what to do," right? That is really, really useful.
Yeah,
That's
it's
so
not like
helpful.
They get through an adventure and like there's a missing paragraph or
Exactly.
something. And they're like,
Yeah.
"Well, didn't
Or we
understand."
all got killed in the very first scene.
Yeah.
You know, like that's external
I suppose
playtesting
one
right
thing
there.
I'm thinking just on the reviewers, if you will, and this is so important for you guys, is I go with the volume game. If you get enough people saying something, then that's a message.
Yeah.
You could send your game to the wrong reviewer who just doesn't get it, and they asked for it, and then they give you a bad review, and it's irrelevant. It really is, because they're not, like, I've seen me send some stuff and said, I've never played an RPG before. Right, well, it's an adventure game that we say is an RPG in a box. Why did you ask for it? I just wanted to give it a go. I didn't like it.
It sort of segues quite nicely into what I'm about to ask next, which is like reviewers like should like contact people that they think they're going to like get games from and like sort of actually like have a good relationship with as well. And it goes the other way. It goes the other way as well for sure. Like make sure you're contacting reviewers who like might like game, because we can't play everything. It's just impossible.
It's impossible.
And reviewers will have their own preferences, and you'll be able to like a good reviewer. You'll be able to tell that for sure. You'll read through their stuff and go like, this person likes this or that. Absolutely. But we're going to talk a little bit about how you find manufacturers as well. So like, how do you go about like once you sort of got to the crowdfunding bit, or self-publishing, or sort of the more established publishing we'll come to, how do you go about identifying the manufacturer for you? For Rowan and Decard?
Yeah, so two primary ways of doing it, and they largely revolve around just being out there. First one, if you go to especially larger cons, UK Games Expo, if you're looking specifically for book, London Book Fair, don't have a stall, but just cut about, and manufacturers will leap out the woodworks and try and say, let's make a book, because that's what they do, that's what they're there to do. I think probably everyone at this table has been accosted by Panda at some point.
Yes.
I mean, even I've been accosted by Panda just walking through the UK Game Festival.
Great prototype kits.
Great prototype kits.
Yeah.
Oh, you'll ask for a prototype kit and you'll get so many weird things. Oh my god, who was it? I
But
forget.
if you ever want to set up a little playtesting a bit in your town, then you should go to Panda and get some of their little playtesting.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
lots of nice things in there.
Yeah.
Great.
Pro tip, sometimes you can contact a manufacturer and they'll just send you a crap ton of free board games as examples. So sometimes you can go directly looking for manufacturers. The other thing I like to do is just whenever I pick up a book or a board game or anything, if I pick it up and I really like it, if it's got nice component quality, if it's printed well, if they've done interesting things, just see who manufactured it. Like talk to the people who made the thing or whatever. How is your relationship with them? Because obviously, manufacturer, if you talk to them, they're sell. Talk to the people who have worked with manufacturers for the real deal on, oh no, it took them 6 months to respond to my email. And you're like, all right, okay, great, maybe not.
Yeah.
So that's my...
Manufacturers are the natural enemy of the publisher. Yeah.
I've got an image
So-
of a nature documentary in my head.
Yeah, but like if you, like Elaine was saying about the form factor, if you know what kind of format your book or your board game or whatever is going to be in, come here, look at people who have made a similar thing and say, where did you manufacture? How did you find it? That's it. Or Google is your friend. You can also Google for printers, but really you're better off, like Elaine said,
most folks like yourselves are very
to get recommendations.
for
Absolutely, yeah.
information,
We're
so-
always happy to share printer kind of recommendations. So.
Kev, for yourself, how did you sort of find your manufacturer? How did you go about it?
Yeah, there was a cohort of us who are all kind of crowdfunded at the same time, and word of mouth, word's kind of got out there. So we use Watts, as it happens, who are quite one of the big names, but there are several as well.
Yeah.
I'm sure you'll have spoken to Watts at some point. Yeah.
We have, yeah.
There you go.
We work with Panda.
There you go. I went with Panda, another one's
Yeah.
from Ningbo, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And they do have slight specialisms. So Panda's really good at miniatures, for example. We need specifically really good cards, which is what Watts specialises in, but they can all do it. The main thing is there's no shortage of it out there. They're all going to get to it. Probably two things I'd suggest that you have a think about would be one, your production quantities, if you're talking about doing it yourself, because like below 1,000 it becomes tricky.
Definitely.
And you'd be surprised how much that might cost trying to get above that. And secondly, a lot of people say, I don't want to do it in China, we did it as well, we wanted to do it, and you end up seeing cost differentials. It becomes hard. I don't know about books, but for board games we find it hard not to do it.
I mean, my understanding is especially if you're looking for plastic miniatures,
Yeah.
there is no option. You have to go to China.
If you're first-time designers, publishers, it's going to be very, very expensive to do it outside of China. I mean, we had options for doing it in Poland, but it was prohibitively expensive.
So
We'd made a huge loss on pretty much everything.
And again, like talking about the components as well, like I got a quote recently for a GM screen that's like 4 8x11 panels, and I got the quote for it, and then it was only afterwards that they told me they can't do it landscape because they literally don't have paper big enough, and the only place that has paper big enough to make this panel is China.
Yeah.
So sometimes you physically can't get
Can't do
the
it,
components anywhere else other than China. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, well, we'll move on to established publishing in just a second, but if you are that crowdfunding person, you sort of like fulfilled your crowdfunding, you're living your dream of having made your own game, when do you decide to make that jump to like being it full time? Has anyone done that?
So,
on the panel?
Not me.
So Eerie Games is made up of two co-directors, myself and Pablo, the artist and lead designer. So Pablo works full time.
Okay.
I don't. I still work full time in my day job, which I'm literally about to go back to tomorrow. So I haven't yet because we still have the fulfillment side of things to complete. There's still some outstanding things there. Once we kind of enter retail, we have more of a sustainable kind of income around the business. That's probably where I feel like we'd be most comfortable. I could probably do it now. But because we still have some of those outstanding liabilities, we have shipping costs. We factored in, of course, we budgeted for it, but there's obviously only so many fluctuations around shipping prices and things like that I wouldn't want to be, for example, taking too much out of the company right now at this stage. While we're still at this kind of like foundational stage, it's really, really important that obviously we don't take too much out right now, that we can reinvest that in the next project and the next thing. And because we can make that work, it's the reason I've kept my job and I still work.
So you've sort of budgeted wages effectively into the crowdfunding campaign.
Yes, and once that becomes more established, well, that's when I'm going to probably pack in my job and do this kind of full time.
Kev, are you full time now? Or?
No, I'm trying to temper this message here because you guys might be the next Martin Wallace or whatever and do really, really well. But quoting Martin Wallace, he always says 99% of people won't make a living at game design. I've got a family. It would be too high risk. I wanted to when we first launched. I was on pat leave and we got the Kickstarter in and we made what seemed like a ton of money. And then when you actually see what you've got left and you want to pay yourself salary and everything else, it's challenging for me. But for me, it's more of the risk thing just now. So I'm never saying never. I think for me, it's probably going to be more of a active vocation retirement thing than a thing. Maybe not. But I wouldn't want people thinking you can't do it. Not at all. Probably the best diligence I can give you is that most of the guys that I know who started in 2016, same time as me, most of them who are doing it full time are financially struggling. I'm sure they would be happy with me sharing that. I'm not saying all of them. I hope that's not the case for you.
Yeah, Elaine, do you have any sort of experience of that? I guess you're both full time with publishers now. Did like early crowdfunding stuff help you, Elaine, into that position?
Yeah, I think the general vibe I always had, because when we were doing crowdfunding stuff for DigiSprite and everything, the general thing for me, especially if you're a new dev starting out, is just it's unlikely that any one thing is going to be the thing that's going to let you go full time. So, we were doing board game Kickstarters, etc. And then I was doing freelance writing for Cubicle 7 at the time, which then led into a full-time writing position at Cubicle 7 at the same time as we were doing this, doing the board games, etc. And then that led into other things and whatnot. And you often find that the people who are full-time in the industry, whether it's board games, role-playing games, they're spinning like 3 or 4 plates at a time. They're doing consulting here, they're doing a crowdfunder here, they're doing this. And eventually over time, if you keep at it, momentum can build on one of those things and you'll find yourself being able to go full-time. Like at one point I was full-time in the video games industry, part-time freelance writing for role-playing games and making board games all at once. I did not sleep much. And then eventually it was the writing which sort of was like, oh, okay, I've got an opportunity to make this full-time. So I think spreading your eggs around a lot of baskets, and it's also good for broadening your skill set and everything. If your goal is, I want to make it full-time, which is also, I'm the only tempering I have as well, is that not going full-time is not a failure of a person or anything either, because we live in the death knell of late-stage capitalism, and sometimes it's just hard to actually do what you want to do for you love a full-time. And if you have to clock in part-time in like Tesco's stock and shelves so that at night you can go home, fulfill your passion projects and create something that's meaningful, that's not a failure of anyone as a person. And you just,
Yeah, I've spoken to a couple of small publishers that maybe have just like put out one game and then gone, yeah, I'm done that now. I'm move on.
Exactly.
That's not a failure. They've done their thing and they move on.
Exactly.
They don't want to do more than that. That's their one thing.
I also know some people who are miserable after they went full time.
Yeah,
And they're like, God,
yeah,
I wish I still did.
Like I suppose the thing about being full time is that like because of the finances of the industry in general, particularly like specifically more on the RPG side, like there is just famously people say, how do you make $1 million in role playing games? You start with 2 million, right? Like that's it's. Just like to dispel any myths about getting into role-playing games. You are not going to make a fortune from it, right? That is a simple fact. But iterative, like this is all about iteration. What we do is all about like trying a thing and growing it slowly over time, organically, sustainably, with kind of decent kind of eye on your finances. My kind of situation is that I actually got a job I applied for a job and got it in the role-playing industry, which is like ridiculously rare. I'm incredibly grateful and feel very lucky, and it is my dream job. But there's a lot of stuff I have to do as part of my job that really sucks, right? Like, living the dream is never really living the dream. There's always going to be a part of the work that you don't enjoy. So like, I work with writers who sometimes have to write things for people or write stuff that they're not fond of, but they have to do it to make a living. You don't get to do 100% of what you love all the time. So it's kind of being aware of that, and like Elaine said, kind of spreading your eggs among many baskets, and just finding the money in the things you love where you can, I suppose, really.
I think a lot of it as well is you're not actually spending most of your time making games. You're doing all the
yes,
support around
that's exactly it.
I don't think anyone's going to
Yes.
say they love doing like VAT returns or anything like that.
Do you want to be a designer or a publisher is a massive question.
Is a massive question,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
one. It's
Not-
one of the
maybe
first
a good panel
questions
for
you
next
should.
year.
Yeah,
Not
one of the
too
first
big.
questions you should ask yourself is whether, like, I am just a publisher. I do not design games, right? And like all of the people that I work with are just designers. They do not publish games. So we work very well together. But if you're starting by yourself, you will have to be both often, and not pay yourself a lot starting off.
I like to say I'm a writer who kept saying yes to things and accidentally keeps stumbling into power. I'm a writer, I'm a designer. Can you look after this? Yeah, sure, no problem. And it's like, why have I got a team now?
Yeah.
What is
It's something that came out of
Yeah.
the freelance panel I was running yesterday. Is like having many strings to your bow is like the way to like make that
Absolutely.
actually become your range and actually a livable thing. Is not just do one thing, but have a few things going on. So let's like come away from crowdfunding for a little bit and like talk a little bit more about sort of established publishing, which I think our RPG panelists will talk to a little bit more than our board game folks because they're a bit more crowdfunding focused. How does established sort of production, like skipping crowdfunding and just putting books out? How does that differ from the sort of crowdfunding area, and how do you decide what to put out?
I mean, certainly for RD, if you've already sold a core book to 1,000 people, factoring in like the long tail and everything, you know that if you're doing a supplement for that, you can maybe expect 600-700 if it's the first one, and then maybe like 500, just big numbers. So you can kind of normally make an estimation on that based on, okay, so we sold X amount of the core book, we want to make this supplement. Does that need a bunch of marketing? Does that need a bunch of this? Or can we just make the thing, put it in stores, use our email lists, etc., to get people to know it and buy it themselves? My brain skipped over the question.
Yeah, it was also like sort of established production, like sort of how do you choose what goes out? What you're saying there, does that feel less risky than going to crowdfunding because you've got an established audience for something? You can sort of estimate how many copies you need, or is it the same sort of like we're going to put this out and see kind of feeling? Or
yeah, it can feel less risky, especially depending on, like, as mentioned, the established audience and the hunger for the things. Like when I was working on all the Warhammer books, you've got hundreds of people clamoring for, like, when's the dwarf book coming out or whatever, and you're like, well, we probably don't need to crowdfund this, and whatnot. But if it's new IPs and whatnot, it's just kind of like a risk sort of thing, I think.
Yeah. For Pelgrane Cat, how do you go about that?
So we... Like, Pelgrane originally kind of started with my business partner, Simon, with him publishing games that he loved. And that was kind of it. But there was no, when I kind of became involved, and certainly when I became kind of co-owner, there was no formula for what it was Pelgrane would publish. And I wanted to, I like to kind of have systems in place for things. So I kind of came up with some core concepts that made sense to me. So if to publish something, we're looking for it either... and ideally it would be two of these three to make money, so a commercial project. So maybe something like Elaine was saying, like maybe we have a core book that people are really interested in and want more stuff for. So we'll look at kind of how can we support that product line that people are interested in. Or it has to be doing something really interesting with RPGs, right? So we've done a lot of really kind of quirky and unusual games, and I know this is kind of what RRD really, really is phenomenal at. But we've done a lot of things that just make the RPG space more interesting, right? You know, or they kind of expand what you can do with gaming or with role-playing game systems in a way. So like innovation, basically. If it's something that's super innovative, I'm kind of interested in trying it out. And then the third thing is making the industry a better place. So we've done a lot of projects which are kind of passion projects for me that kind of boost traditionally underrepresented voices. So if we can do a project like that, for example, it doesn't necessarily have to be commercially successful. It's more important to us to boost people and get their stories out there and get their names out there. Whereas if we are doing something, you know, so we're looking at those as kind of criteria. You know, where do all of these projects line up on those kind of commercial criteria for us to publish it?
For our sort of, well, you guys are both sort of in the sort of crowdfunding side of our panel. But do you want that to become more established publishing? Like, do you want to be able to like sort of build a groundswell to be able to then just like be able to put out projects you want without having to go to a crowdfunding platform, or are you sort of sticking with those platforms?
No, I'll let you go first.
Okay. I mean, sure. In an ideal world, that would be great, right? I mean, there's so much risk around Kickstarters and any crowdfunding. Right? It's like you're putting everything into this one moment that could fail. But if you have a more of a kind of established pipeline and you have more of a workflow where you're kind of slowly putting out games more steadily, where you're not relying on those like just those moments to either fail or succeed, then yes, I think that'd be ideal. Crowdfunding, I think, is an interesting place right now where it really does often feel like a kind of like a pre-order for a thing that has had a
Kickstarter is not a store. They're very insistent.
They're very insistent. They're not a store, right? Yeah. But it does. It like
it's a reward, sir.
It's a reward, right? That's right. But it does feel like you need to, like you said, have a big cinematic trailer. You need to have all the renders, all of the art, all of the visuals kind of done before, because that bar is just kind of raised over the past few years of what's an acceptable kind of Kickstarter or crowdfunding project now. So ideally in an ideal world for us, I think we'd love to kind of skip the crowdfunding process and just be able to kind of put it out when we're ready, when we don't have 7,000 people waiting for our project.
Yourself, Kev?
Agreed. Yeah. I can't think of anything useful to add. The only thing that I'm worried about is you guys might be getting put off. You may. I totally agree with the fun thing, right? You may come up with something that's just different and fun, and people buy it. You just never know what's going to fly, and so why not try it? But I guess don't be frightened of it. If it fails, just fail fast and do it again. It's gonna, there are so many things out there, and the other thing that we learned the lesson. Somebody said it to me. You cannot really control. Yes, there are calendars out there, but you cannot control who's going to launch what on the same day or roundabout at the same time. So, funnily enough, when we launched, Gloomhaven launched. It's like, yay! And we did it right. And that happens constantly. People constantly put out a game about zombies, and 2 seconds later, Seymour have got their zombie game out.
Yeah.
Happy days, It is what it is, but.
I think it comes back to having a clear idea about what your goal is. Do you want to be a game designer, or do you want to be a publisher? Because if you want to be a game designer, you just want to be making games, right? Just a game, do another game, do another game, do another game, because publishers will then start to approach you. Whereas if you want to be a publisher, you need to be a lot more focused on you as a company, right? On the financials, on the budgeting, on the marketing, on the admin, on all of that side of it.
Before we wrap up and sort of put some questions from audience, we're sort of pushing now, so we'll take some questions from yourselves in a little while. I'd like to ask the panel sort of like, what, from the established point of view and from the sort of crowdfunding point of view, what's the sort of like one piece of advice you'd like folk to walk away with from this talk, to like, or just in general about sort of publishing your game and like putting yourself out there?
I would say it's all about community for us, and it's the one thing you can't really buy. You can't pay for it. Yeah. And it's the one thing that just takes time. Our community that we've built up over the past sort of 3-4 years, our Discord community is really active, and it's because we spend so much time engaging with them, and it's a lot of work. It really is a lot of work engaging with that Discord community, but it also kind of does double duty in that there are playtesters. They're the people that are giving us that feedback. They're often quite forthcoming with their feedback as well, which is great. But it's all that great feedback. But they were the early backers of our project. They were waiting, like there was a countdown, and they were like sitting in the Discord, like we're going to back it the moment it goes live. But that for us is something that we built up over time, something we're really proud of. But you can't just pile a load of money into that and hope that works. And that's just hard work, really. So there's no shortcuts, I think, really. Like you have to have that community. You have to have that market there, and have a way of engaging with them. It's not just numbers, really. They're all people that all hopefully want your product.
Yourself, Kev?
So I agree with that's the thing you can control when you should do it. Yeah, for sure. So adding to that, so I'm not giving the same answer. I would ask yourself the question genuinely, why are you doing this? And there is no right answer to this. If it's because you want your name on a board game box, and there's loads of people out there that want to do that, that's cool. Get it done and make your game. But if it's because you want this to be like the next thing and sold all around the world, what's your plan for that? Also, I would say a lot of people think that they need to have a game published. I get that that's the point of this, but actually what they want is for 20 other people to play it. There are much cheaper and easier ways to do that than to go to China and get 1,500 copies made and then they sit in your garage. So don't do this. Have a think about why are you doing this?
Sort of like the actual motivation, like what's your aim? Elaine?
I started with it. I'm going to end with it. To double importance is just think about the form factor. Think about the final thing, because we are making board games. We are making books, physical things, the tactile experience, the size of the thing, even down to silly things like are these you can 3D print prototype components very easily, cheap and whatnot, and be like, okay, are these the right size? These feel right. Game feel, the tactile nature of everything is a unique aspect of board games and role-playing games that goes overlooked too much because people make the thing in documents and then last minute go, oh crap, we need cards. What cards are we using? So I'm always like, okay, as early as possible, get physical prototypes. Even if you can do inane things like flat plan a book so that you know how many words you get per page. So you decide on your font size, you decide on your size and everything. You're like, okay, it's 8.5. How many words per page do we get? great, if I want a stat block for a monster, I can only fit 500 words on a page. And now you're thinking in reverse. You're thinking from the end of the book what it's going to look like, and it'll save you so much heartache when it comes to editing, because you won't have stuff all over the place. You're trying to cram into square peg, round hole. So I think, yeah, and same goes for board games. Just prototype early, physical.
If I can, that would be one thing I learned this year on a board game. If you're going to make something and you're going to put a punch board in, figure out the size of your punch board, and that is it. Right?
Yeah.
You cannot keep adding punch boards to any of your tokens.
Unless you've got a very big box.
Unless you've got a very big box.
It gets taller and
it gets
taller.
expensive.
I mean, adding to what Elaine was saying there, like, components don't need to be fancy either.
No.
Like, I was playing Joyride down at the Rebellion stand yesterday. I don't know if anyone else has played it yet, but it's got like these. It's basically just a board and some cards, but the only major component are these little wooden cars, that are just 2 hex wide, and they're just lovely. It's just a lovely thing to move around. Incredibly simple, but very satisfying. And they've obviously thought about that quite hard. It's just a nice thing to move around.
And there are certain things, for example, a lot of new RPG designers, they will create zines. Zines are great for selling at cons, but retailers won't stock them because they can't shelf them.
Yeah.
Because they don't have a spine, so you can't put them sideways on a thing. They'll just see staples. So there's just knowing the form factor, knowing how it can be displayed, how people interact with it is super important. And it needs to be thought about earlier, so think about it earlier. All of you.
We found that with silver, you know the boosters you put cards in?
Yeah.
We thought it'd be a genius idea to create little silver foil boosters, and then the retailers told us that great, but they're a pain in the ass to put in the shelf. So, so we've now taken all those expansions and put them in a little box instead. So just be aware, you think it's a genius idea. Speak to a retailer, I guess.
Ask a retailer.
Ask a retailer.
Yeah, I mean, that's speaking is kind of leads into exactly what I was going to say. Like, we've kind of touched on some really important points, but the key thing I think is, especially for all of you as you're kind of starting off, the key thing is you're part of a community. You don't have to do all of this by yourself. Talk to people who are already doing it. Talk to all the people down on the floor. Ask them how they got started. Just chat to them. Don't sell them your game. Just say, how did you get started? Why are you doing this? How does this work? How does this work? Get on the internet. Ask the same thing. Get on Google. Google for resources. There's so much stuff out there. Like Atlas do a thing called the White Box, which is just a board games prototyping set that you can buy and then just use to make up your games. There are so many resources out there for you, and so many people wanting you all to succeed, right? And take advantage of that. Talk to your local game store. Ask them what kind of things are selling, what kind of things aren't selling. Do your research, have a plan, and just know what you need to know, and go out there and ask people for help, and ask people to try your things, and external play test.
I came across the Tabletop Industry Network earlier in the year, which are like a UK-based organisation, and they're out there willing to help. They're mostly RPG focused, I believe. At the moment. But they're.
And again, I can't think of what Tanya's booth is called downstairs.
Indie Collective?
The Indie Collective. But they're a group of kind of indie RPG publishers, and there are so many groups like that. I don't know if it's the same on the board game side.
Well, I was just going to say, remember, we're all gamers and we all buy stuff. They said we all want you to succeed.
Yeah,
of course.
Yeah, we do. That's why we're here doing this.
Right, so if anyone's got any questions for our panel? Yes?
So I got 2 questions. The first one is, for me personally, I love storytelling games. But not specifically like RPGs, but it's a mixture of kind of storytelling RPG and board game or slash card game. So put all these different elements together. Do you have any tips on how best or how well we could design and make that games?
Sorry, but you turn a sort of storytelling game concept into reality, basically.
Yes, but on a board, but you are still doing a lot of storytelling.
For our board game guys, I think.
That's an incredible question. So one of the things that we've wanted to do with our game is that we never had a prescribed story. We don't have a plot or anything. There's no there's no like timeline that ever happens in our world. The idea behind our game was that it was always this myth, this kind of legend that things can contradict one another. So we almost went the exact opposite way, where, for example, we don't have lots and lots of text. It's much more about mood and feel. And we always wanted the world to feel inviting, and that was, I think, something that we wanted to do quite early on, is kind of take the tropes of kind of fantasy and kind of move away from kind of some of those darker elements of fantasy and have a world that's inviting and hopeful that people want to explore, but lets you kind of come up with their own stories. So we have little bits of flavor text that just kind of explain, like, who are these characters, how do they interact, and you can sort of piece those together and sort of see how the story unfolds. You can come up with your own little tales within that world, and a big part of our kind of storytelling often comes from a kind of emergent interaction between how the cards play, right? So you have this fun story where, like, the underdog eliminates all the heirs from a clash or something like that, and that becomes a really fun kind of moment with all the players talking about it later. You create like these rivalries that then, when the next game happens, suddenly everyone's kind of out to get them. So for us, I don't have an exact answer on how to make one that's a storytelling that's a prescribed story, because it often requires lots of text. For example, things like Gloomhaven are a great example, where you have like event cards and you can like choose your own adventure type thing. That's not something we've integrated into our game. Something we kind of actively didn't want to include all those options. So for us, it's kind of like we're showing rather than kind of telling. I think that would be my approach. Is you can do a lot with just visuals and kind of keeping it simple.
Yeah, I love a good narrative coming out of a game, and it's definitely the emergent stuff that's more interesting to me than you writing down a bunch of read aloud text.
Yeah.
So like if you want a mix of that stuff, great. But like, it's the emergent stuff where, like you say, like players can like sort of have their own legends and stories from your game. That's the good stuff.
Yeah, I'm mainly kind of like not too much text, but like just a way for the players to have their imaginations to create their stories.
Cool. Anyone else?
Did you have a second question?
Yeah.
Oh, did you have a second
I'll
question?
do your
Yes.
job, Ian. It's all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm completely new about like publishing, like because I'm just I love like making games.
Sure.
And it's for fun.
Yeah.
And I don't have anyone who like not necessarily support me, but like anyone who has similarity to me.
Sure.
Making both games, like making games, and I don't have like budgets.
Sure.
And is it still worth approaching like a publisher to see if my games is good enough to like, or
Okay. So like, sort of what stage do you like? Can you approach a publisher with?
yeah,
the thing?
because I'm not really looking for like money.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, like I'm just creating this fun games, and I just wonder if it's going to be good enough to be.
Right. So you're looking
get
for like some
published.
people to assess it, assess your idea, and like sort of give you some feedback, basically.
Yeah.
Like, is that like publishers would take that kind of thing, or is that pitch kind of too early for publishers? Really, talking about playtesting instead.
I think, like, for example, Rowan, Rook and Decard, we have like an open email box for just pitches from the inbox. The thing I always caution people with is that publishers are very busy, and normally our calendars are already full up with all the games we want to make.
Yeah.
So anything you pitch has to be so goddamn good that it'll blow the socks off their publishers and make all of their pet passion projects vanish out the window, so they make time in their calendar for you. So a lot of the time, if you do throw a pitch at a publisher, the best you can hope for is some feedback. You don't lose anything by throwing pitches at publishers. You can give them a shot. But you certainly, it's vanishingly rare, I would say, that somebody walks up to a publisher with a game and whatnot. If a publisher comes to you, it normally means they have a slot that they're looking to fill, etc. But I think the type of feedback, it sounds like you're looking for, is maybe better found from playtesting groups, organizations, and whatnot of other designers who will also feed off your excitement, give you ideas and whatnot, and help you develop that into a more finished thing, or a more finished thing that you can hopefully like make yourself, or get to that point where a publisher goes, holy shit, stop the presses. We're making this now.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's
So
what.
in
Yeah.
board games, there's like Playtest UK, there's an organisation
Yeah.
that does that, and I used to run an Edinburgh playtest group, which Keith McLennan has now taken over, and he's running a playtest zone at Tabletop Scotland as well. They do that pretty much every year. So
You need to go and meet Keith. He's over there.
yeah, go
Absolutely.
and talk to
Yeah.
Keith. There's new designers there,
Yeah.
all at early stages. Maybe Phil Harris at the back as well, who's doing the game jam. He's very encouraging and will help you out as well.
Right.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
hesitant.
I'm on the game jam.
Oh, great.
Oh, cool.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good.
That's
That's a good place to start. Get practice of doing the thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd hesitate to say I can speak for everybody here, but I'm pretty sure I can probably say we do get a lot of people saying, I've got an idea. That's nowhere near.
Yeah.
And that's great, but you need it to be way beyond. I've got
We
an
have
idea.
so many ideas.
Yeah.
So many ideas. More ideas than we know what to do with. Yeah.
Okay, let's go to someone else. Yeah, lady there.
Hi, sorry, I just have a couple of things as well. So the first thing, sorry, I'm not sure your name, but you mentioned
Me?
with the glasses. Sorry.
Oh,
yes,
Elaine.
Elaine,
Elaine.
hello.
You mentioned at the very beginning that you like to think of like the finished product like, on the shelf.
Yeah.
And something has recently been made aware with me with board games is like sleeving cards. I know it sounds really kind of basic a little bit, but it really kind of like annoys me if I sleeve cards in a board game and then they don't fit. So if you are any of you kind of want to make a board game, a little suggestion for me would be to kind of think of the finished product in that sense and think if people do want to sleeve cards and stuff, if you fit.
I've currently spent 7 months so far redesigning our insert to accommodate sleep.
Yeah.
Like I think like board games is such a big thing, and I've got other board games as well that once you've popped out all the little bits from the I can't remember, they then don't fit
Yeah,
with
sure.
the
Yes.
board
Yeah.
game stuff.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
that I think that's a really big thing. And then also as well for publishers, my question is, if you've done everything right, let's say like you've done all the play testing and the writing testing and everything that you kind of need to do, you've got like a really good solid idea, you think it's going to be a really kind of big success. I'm not sure if this would actually happen, but if it does and if it would happen, what would you do if it ended up flopping once it released?
Okay, so like once you're past the sort of publication, like actually making the thing happen.
Like, so you've made it, you've done all the play testing, you've published it, it's all out.
Okay.
So all the spoofy BGG 10s have gone down to a
Yeah.
6.
So, but so what you're asking is like, how do you deal with like failure effectively of your product once it's out in the world? I'm sure our panel have had experience of such things.
I have never failed in my life. How dare you?
I do apologise.
I mean, it's a creative industry fundamentally. So, like with any creative industry, like art or writing or anything like that, you have to accept that failure is part of the process. Is literally, and that goes for publishers as well. Even established publishers, like Pelgrane is 20 years old, and we still are like, oh, this is a great idea, and we publish a thing, and nobody else thinks it's a great idea, and you're like, okay, cool, we'll just put that one to the side and move on to the next thing. I mean, that's it. Just don't take it personally. It's not a personal attack. It's like, I like to do a thing where I'm like, well, what can I learn from that? Yeah. Like, why did that not work? Like, what was it about that particular thing that didn't work? And how can I use that to make the next thing better? And I think that's an important way to, like I mentioned iteration earlier on, like playtesting is all about iteration, and so is publishing. It's like you publish a thing, and if it doesn't work, you don't do that again. You do it differently the next time, but you just keep going.
Yes, the
with
nature
it.
of publishing changes
Yeah.
over time as well.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly,
so
yeah.
For
So-
RPGs, PDF have become a much bigger thing over the last few years. And like,
Crowdfunding has
Crowdfunding.
completely changed.
Yeah.
Yeah, RPG publishing.
for yourself, Elaine, who's never failed?
Never failed in my life, no. I would say the big thing for me is trying to identify why it failed. For example, I released games when COVID hit. That did not go well.
Yeah.
Imagine trying to sell board games when all the board game stores are closed and all the groups can't go outside. So sometimes the failure will be through no fault of your own. You have a perfect project. As Picard once said, you can make no wrong moves and still fail. And that is not a fault of character, that is just a fault of circumstance.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, you can sometimes take a step back, take a breather and say, this is a great game, it is done, it is still ready, we'll give it some time, we'll see, is there a different way to sell it, is there a different market to sell it to, maybe talk to some publishers. If you can identify why it didn't hit, that's the key thing. If it's a creative endeavor and it gets put out and it just doesn't have an audience, then that's a different thing. You take that hit and you say, rock and roll, that didn't work, let's try something else and pulp 20,000 books or whatever the heck you end up having to do. to try and like cut your losses and whatnot. And everyone's been there.
Yeah.
You know, there's always going to be.
It is literally part of the process,
Yeah,
right? It
I
is
have
part
failed.
of the process in everything, in every element of your life, right? Failing is part of getting better. If you have not failed, you are not getting better,
Yes.
right? That's how it is.
For our board game folks?
So 2 nuggets. So that one checkout. Define failure, right? I get that's a rubbish answer, yeah. But like, if you had fun and you made something good, and a number of people who you possibly never met before liked it, I think I saw somebody who did. It was Lance Mixter who does Undead Viking reviews. He said to me, if you're doing a podcast and you're knocking your pan in, and 40 people around the world like it, who's to say that's not successful?
Yeah.
You know, who's to say?
Yeah.
So check out Isaac Childress's first campaigns before Gloomhaven.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they're a failure,
Yeah.
but they're not Gloomhaven numbers.
They're not
Okay.
those numbers, sure.
Yeah, the Forge one. You've been there and done it right well to it. So there's that, and then secondly, it's just that it's kind of like, well, okay, we've done this and we've hopefully not bought the farm anymore if we're having a pop whatever. But it's really hard as a publisher, or certainly I find it, to pick your production quantity. I know you mentioned budget earlier, and I agree, but they sucker you in with the discounts.
Yeah,
they really do.
they
And
do.
you go, well, I'll just make an extra 1,000. No, we can't. It's challenging.
Congratulations, you're now paying to store an
Yeah,
extra 1,000.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
How big is your garage?
Yes.
For yourself, I mean, you're very early days.
We're quite early, so let's hope that doesn't actually happen.
Yeah. We haven't failed at all yet.
I've just had my fingers crossed the entire time.
You can say you've not failed yet.
I've not failed at this, at least. Yes, I think the kind of production quality thing, quantity thing is definitely an interesting side of things, like how to kind of budget at that. For us, crowdfunding helps because you obviously have a minimum number. You just know the minimum number, right? But then, are we like doubling that for retail, or like? And obviously the big questions around where that goes. Or is it going to get stocked worldwide? How many does each localization partner need, and things like that. So it gives us a little bit of a help. But yeah, that's definitely something on our mind. Is like, are we ordering too many or too few? Is it suddenly going to instantly sell out? I mean, maybe a nicer problem to have, but then having to hit second print runs and things like that obviously has a huge amount of delay. So this is all things that we have to be factoring in and thinking about in the next stage of our project, because we are moving very much into that logistics side of things where there really is that. It's coming to market where those kind of failures can potentially can happen. So it's just we're trying to plan for it as much as we can, but like you guys said, it's a market out there that we don't always have control over, and there can be things that will happen, like shipping crises, things like that.
I mean, going back to Gloomhaven briefly, who knew that a one man's like absolute fever dream dungeon gigantic thing in a box would be huge? That thing could have absolutely flopped.
Totally
That succeeded was kind of mind blowing. That thing is massive. I'd also add, don't lose your shirt. Do not mortgage your house on your dream game project. Make sure you still have a roof over your head and can feed your children or your dog or whatever it is. Do not invest everything you have in a creative endeavor, which might go very well or might go badly wrong. I've seen it. It's not pretty.
That might have been my first mistake, because I don't have any dependents or anything like that. But I did put a lot of my own savings into it. If it did go very wrong, I mean, I wouldn't be happy. But I would probably be in a much worse financial situation than I am.
Yes, so we had some questions over here. Gentleman in orange.
You said that, I don't remember your name.
Oh, Andrew.
But you said that you had an artist in house that was like full time.
Yes.
And Elaine, you said that like you don't have to bring art with your pitch, but like as a designer, if you're designing a game, art might be a second thing. But if you spend 20 minutes online, there's billions of games out there, and art and marketing is the thing that makes them stand out. So I was thinking, like, how do you decide the level? Where do you come in on the artistry to be like, this is where we were going to sell it, or this is how we're going to pitch it?
So you're sort of asking, like, how far do you go down the art line for a project that you're pitching to publishers?
Like, what's the polish level? What's the investment?
Sure.
Kind of thing on the art.
Who wants to take that?
I think if you're pitching to a publisher, it just depends on how dependent your art is on the project. Like if you are pitching a sort of medieval fantasy world, you can just sort of like use visual touchstones or whatnot. Even if you're on like places like Drive-Thru or whatnot, there are places where you can buy reusable art assets, like a lot of like all the zines and the indie devs and whatnot. There are companies, artists who will, you know, chuck 20 quid. Here's like a cover or whatnot to sell the vibes. If you're just doing that, sometimes you can get away with just descriptions, etc. If you are getting to the point where you're trying to like sell your game to people, because selling to people and selling to publishers is different. Because publishers care about slightly different things than people. Once you're selling to people, it's like, yeah, judge a book by its cover, etc. You're going to have to probably invest some money into at least a nice couple of few promotional pieces. But in general, publishers who are in a state to help you publish something already have a good idea of, if you say, that looks like a steampunk Pocahontas or whatever, they can be like, all right, rock and roll. They're used to sort of conceptualizing things like that, you know. So, yeah, that was very waffly. You can get the vibes across if you're aiming to publisher. If you're selling to people, you need an actual chunks of money, a freelancer and whatnot. You know.
So your pitch to publisher more almost mood boardy kind of thing.
Yeah,
which is
mood
like
boards are great.
Getting an idea across. But yeah, again, don't lose your shirt on like. I heard a story from Gen Con one year where there's like a panel kind of like this where people were sort of talking to publishers about pitching, and one guy had invested something like, I think, $10,000 in his art for his game, and every single publisher on the panel went, "Yeah, we'll do that."
Yeah.
Why have you done that?
Yeah.
Don't use AI.
Do
not use AI art. I'll tell you right now.
Yeah,
you'll
get
shot down so
you'll be
fast.
found out.
Yeah,
Use podcasts like mine. We'll talk about it. And not in a good way.
That goes for writing as well.
Yeah, stock art's fine. It's there.
It does go for writing. People don't think we can tell, but we can tell when ChatGPT has written something, because we're goddamn writers in a very niche industry. So,
gentleman beside you there had a question.
Something I found when I criticize people works, like my friends, or even in academia, because I'm in academia, I read people's things. It's very easy to criticize what something else did. It's very easy to see all the weak points. But when I look at my own works, when I look at my own game, I cannot see the black point. I cannot see how I can break it, while I can completely, within like a page reading, find 6 exploits that let me get within the game. So how do you efficiently look at your own product and be like, is it good? How do I break it? How do I look at it from a spectator point of view?
So you're asking, how do you like evaluate your own work, sort of about outside yourself, and like sort of think about like, is this good?
Yeah, no, even like, how do you give feedback to your own work? Like, is it good? Can you play it? Can you see if it's, like you were saying earlier, you played this game that was completely, you couldn't go through it because it was unbroken. Maybe they like didn't realize because they were just, oh yeah, it worked like this, and then you add another point of view. So how, without asking other people to do it, like how do you yourself can evaluate? You cannot.
You can't. I would say you literally can't. Yeah.
You've got to get other people on board.
That's again playtesting. External. It's
like
all
Kat
about
said,
external playtesting.
External playtesting, especially. You at the table is fine, but please give your game. I've reviewed like quite a lot of games, and I can tell the ones that haven't had external playtesting. I'm talking things from big companies as well, where it's just like. No one who wasn't on this project has read this rule book.
Yeah, exactly.
And I can tell, because it's like, you know what it says. I don't. It's gobbledygook. So you got the table like we were mentioning earlier, like he's playtesting, but external playtesters, like Cal said earlier.
There is one cool group on Facebook who do a monthly swap around the books, and they say you read mine and I'll read yours, and that can help quite a lot. If that helps.
Yeah, there's loads of resources out there. Check out playtesting groups. Definitely. Anyone else? Yes.
So, from a practical standpoint, let's say a classic game, Ticket to Ride. So, to produce it, essentially, from a point of view of money, so you say at least 1,000 copies you need to order. Okay? Sure. So, let's say how much you need to expect to spend for, a game like that.
Yeah. To make it? Probably about.
Yeah.
If you were making 1,000 copies, $4 and shipping it to get it to the UK, another $5.
Ticket to Ride probably. I mean, they're probably making it in like hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, they'll be making hundreds. I'm
probably costing like 50 cents to make.
No, but if you go to in China, whatever.
Yeah, so that's not. If you were making 1,000s, right? That's probably going to cost you about $5, $6 to get it landed in the UK if you're doing well on shipping. And then if you're going to sell it into distro, they're going to want to take the VAT off that. So let's say you're saying it for sell it. Say you're going to retail it for 5 times £6. Let's just call £1 and $1 the same. That's £30. Take your VAT off for that, 20%. So I don't want to do the maths on that, but what we're taking off them for 6, so 24, and then they're going to want 60% off of that. So taking off 6 times 2.4 for that, you're going to make about £3 to £4 per game. Sell it to distro. We then sell it to retailers. Blah blah blah.
And as the quantities go up, the price goes down. But
the one thing I would say is that people's expectations on board gaming prices, in my experience, have changed radically over the last 4 or 5 years. People now accept that 30 quid is now 40. They may not like it, but 40, 50 quid is the new norm. It just is what it is.
Yeah. It's the same in RPGs.
Yeah. When I see like a new board game that I like and it's in the 40 quid range, I'm like, oh, that's cheap.
Yeah.
And like a few years ago, I'd be like, oh, that's expensive.
I was nerding out as a fanboy for Slate Industries yesterday. It was like $40. I was like, yeah, that's just the price of it.
Capitalism.
Yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
But there'll be lots of advice out there, I imagine, about or like you can talk to folk about like that sort of like equation and like.
If you ever do it, I've learned the hard way. People, they'll rather pay more for your game and limited for shipping. They hate paying for shipping.
Yeah, they really do. They really do.
Because you will see, for example, if you want just to do for yourself, not for yourself, for your friends.
Yeah, like 20 copies, That's a noble enterprise. There's no shame in doing that.
So can you still do it?
Not with like a big manufacturer, but you probably will be able to find somebody who would just do like 20 copies.
I mean, if you were to reach out to different manufacturers, they'll give you quotes for free. You don't need to spend. You just give them your component list and what you would like. And they'll usually give you a different quantity. It's usually around like 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, 15,000, whatever. And you'll see the price break at each point there. So you can check, for example, loads of different ones will do it. Panda do it. Which is like you essentially submit all your things online, they'll give you a rough quote.
There are some small print-on-demand places as well. Like for instance, like way back in the day, I made a wee card game called Revenge of the Bee Movie through the now infamous Ken Whitman. But there's like places like Drive Through Cards, which is like a Drive Through RPG.
Game Crafter.
And they basically just store the files digitally and will just print decks one at a time and send them out to punters. You could go that way. And
it's not a bad way to go.
I'm sure there's a small board game UK print on demand. But I mean, these prices are not you can sell to public prices. But if you want to print 20 copies for a friend's wedding or whatever, that would be a way to go for sure. Yes, sir.
So you mentioned globalization. What made me think about something interesting. At what point do you start thinking about internationalization and localization, and how do you translate your games if you want to go over Europe? I mean, you've been in the video game industry, so clearly you've been there. We work together.
Right, okay.
I haven't seen you in so long, man.
I'd like to put that to our RPG folks first, because you've got a lot more words to translate than these guys. So how do you go about sort of like that kind of thing? When you decide to like put something out in a different language?
Do you need to think about that while designing it? You just think, oh yeah, I'm famous enough in the UK. Let me go to Europe. And
when do you go to when do you go to that, like translating your game into a different language?
I mean, certainly, if there's one thing I've learned is that translators will come to you. And if your game reaches a certain point of interest, like, in general, I'm a fucking Scottish white woman. I don't know what will sell incredibly well in Italy, let alone Brazil or whatever. I don't know that demo. That's not me. But the people who are translating, they translate books and resell them. They know what will sell. So you'll often find a translator will approach you if your book reaches a point where they say, "Oh, this'll slap." In our country and whatnot, and then they'll come to you, and then it's just negotiations at that point. I can't think on many times where I've gone looking for a translator aside from when we were doing like Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. In that case, it's like because Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is huge in Poland. It's they play Warhammer more than they play D&D and stuff, just because of the way that the culture grew. And at that point, it's like, well, we know it's huge in Poland, so we can start shopping for translators. But normally I think translators come to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, we're translated, I think, into 14 different languages now. Our games are, and in all of those instances, basically the translators have come to us, and it's again similar to what I was saying earlier about having a plan. In that, like, translators know their own audience, and each translating company kind of they have their own flavor, they have their own brand, basically, and they know what types of games in the English language market will work well for their audience and for their brand, and they tend to approach well, certainly they've tended to approach us. The only time we've ever tried to find a translator was Cthulhu is really big in Japan, and we have been trying to find a translator for our Trail of Cthulhu game in Japanese. So we literally reached out to people we knew who lived in Japan who were role players, and we're like, who are the companies there? Like, who could we approach? Can you get us contact details for these? You know, so that's literally how we went about it. But generally speaking, like Elaine said, all of our foreign language licensees have come to us.
Immediately, as soon as you come out, the first time you come out with the game, or you do after, essentially. So in your case, for example, are you planning immediately to release in different language? Or?
I think there's, at least for board games, there's kind of two trains of thought there, where some publishers. So we spoke to Leader Games specifically when we were developing our project, and one of the pieces of advice they said was that if you can get the English versions kind of done first, you'll often find that a lot of partners will kind of approach you afterwards.
Yeah.
Because your game's out there in the market,
Yeah.
they can see it's doing hopefully quite well. But the other kind of school of thought is that if you fold everything into the same print run, then you're getting more orders in your bulk, right? So everything's a little bit cheaper. There are things to factor in, like plate change fees, which involve when you change the actual plates for printing. You switch that out to the other language, and there's a fee involved in that process. And the language partners would usually pay that fee. So for us, the reason that we included the language partners in this print run was because it pushes that number right up, and gives us a pretty big price break on the quantity. So we could financially kind of make that one work for us.
Kev, have you got experience there?
Exactly that. A couple of nuggets, particularly for your storytelling game. German in particular, they have huge words.
Yeah, it's massive.
So you'd be surprised the number of them that will say your game's not going to work because I cannot fit it on the card. Because the game we make is a storytelling game, it has lots of text in it. So just be aware that all these lovely words you're going to nick from Cthulhu or whatever, etc., 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 are not going to fit on those cards. So bear that in mind. And secondly, you can also go the franchising route, which is the way we're doing it. So we're currently going into French and Spanish and Italian as well. But they're going to want all the assets to go off and make their production. They will approach you and give you that look. Just totally agree with your statement. Like, they're going to know what sells in their area, so they're going to want to tweak it, etc., etc. But it's a cool thing to do. Can you make a ton of money doing it? Well, I don't know. It remains to be seen. But yeah, it's a cool thing. But what I would say is, if you've got, depending on your game, if you've got a board game that can be fairly language independent, there's no way our game could be, but many out there, that's a great way to go sometimes. You can just do it on day one.
We've got time for one more quick question. Yeah, at the back there?
The panel's opinion about not using AI. So I don't know if you heard this prediction that there would be no programming jobs in the future, but there would be jobs where programmers are able to use AI. So I'm trying to connect this to use of AI, for instance, for art generation. And for instance, my game requires specific kind of art, which is like Thai style art, traditional art. And it is hard to convey to any designer or to find that, and I mean, it's a waste of time to do that. And AI, not incredibly perfect, but it is closer to something doable and for me to move on. So I am quite surprised by this suggestion that don't use AI.
It's largely, certainly from my opinion, it's largely because the community we work in, people will just hate on you so much if you use AI, because you're taking jobs away from artists. I'm not saying I agree or disagree with what you're trying to do, and I get the aesthetic. My challenge I would probably get from a backer that I would put back to you would be, so why can't you find a Thai artist to do one piece and show us what that looks like? I don't know if you can or can't.
Yeah, from a reviewer's point of view, though,
it would take a long time, but it's if I was going out to my backer, that's what they would want to hear. Why are you taking a job away from an artist?
Yeah, from a reviewer's point of view, I know plenty of reviewers who will just not touch you.
So I would have two things to say to that, and I might be a little Miss Contrary here in the corner, because we've actually published a book with AI art, exclusively AI art, and we knew how people were going to feel about it, and we put up a post on our website saying, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it. Again, because I mentioned about innovation, this is a new tool, we wanted to test it out. We had a book that it was a good fit for, conceptually, and we published it, and, you know, it's doing fine. We got a lot of pushback from the community. A lot of people were like, we're very disappointed in you, you know, this is not something we want to see. I think, like, if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, then it sounds like you almost want to use AI art for mock-ups, for like what we were saying earlier, to be able to give something to an artist to say, this is what I'm looking for. And I personally think AI is fantastic for that, because I'm not an art person, I'm a writer. So I can put things into words, but I can't put things into pictures. And I find that like giving somebody an AI image and being like something kind of like this, like it allows me to basically take my words and put them into a picture that I can then use to work with an artist or to speak to an artist. So not replace an artist with AI, but use it to translate my words into their art. Use it as that kind of interface. So that's what we're doing with it. We're not currently planning on doing any more with AI art, but we did want to try it one time. So I am not as like, no AI art, as a lot of other people in the industry will vocally be.
I mean, I know John Hodgson, the first version of Mass Witches had AI art in it because he was fiddling around with it as an artistic tool, and then as it's become progressively more incredibly dodgy, he's come away from that and like gone the model route. So yeah, even like, and John's a great thinker and a good person to talk to about art and that kind of thing. He thinks a lot about this kind of stuff. It's like is coming away from it for the final products. But like Kat says, for like probably pitching that kind of like. Any of the rest of the panel got thoughts on AI before we wrap up?
I am one of these. No.
Fair enough.
Call me a Luddite, call me what you wish. I am morally opposed to AI. I find the concept of offloading human creativity onto just stolen assets, etc., regurgitated by an algorithm is horrifying. I dislike it, and I will immediately kick any pitch down the stairs if it comes at me with any AI. But I am very opposed.
Yeah.
So
I'm probably not as massively down that ethically, although I totally respect it. But from a practical perspective, I read this stuff. As a publisher, you will spend your night looking at forums and getting opinions to get the zeitgeist, or I do anyway. And it's just so many people hate on it.
Yeah.
You're just risking your company.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we're done, folks. A big round of applause to all our panelists. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.